If you're looking for the most riveting moment in this story, imagine a lone farmer standing firm against a cadre of leather-clad bikers tearing through fragile fields. That single moment, when he reveals his hidden military past in one swift takedown, changes everything. It's the spark that ignites our entire tale, setting a once peaceful county on a collision course with danger, secrets, and redemption. But that's just the beginning. From tense standoffs to unexpected alliances, each scene deepens the stakes, reminding us that courage can reside in the most unassuming individuals. You won't want to miss how it all unfolds, or how our steadfast hero and his loyal neighbors fight for their quiet corner of farmland. So stick around to see how justice ultimately prevails. While you're here, please consider subscribing to my channel, Farmer's Story, so you don't miss out on more gripping narratives and heartwarming tales. Your support means the world to me. Wade Reynolds rose before the first light touched the fields of Mason County, boots crunching along rows of wheat in the cool dawn air. At 42, he carried a quiet strength shaped by years in places few civilians knew. As a former Force Recon Marine, Wade had run missions seldom recorded on official rosters. Now he found a humble peace on this Kansas farm, each wheat stalk a reminder of the simpler life he had nurtured for 5 years. Mason County rarely saw turmoil, yet that impression was about to fracture. A faint rumble of motorcycles prickled Wade's instincts. No casual hum of weekend bikers, but a measured growl that grew louder. He paused at his property's edge, recalling the menacing pitch he'd received at the latest farmer's market. A gang called the Gray Vultures had come through, peddling protection. Wade had refused, sensing extortion. Groups like that didn't take kindly to hearing no. He knew retaliation was likely, but had hoped it might be limited to a sabotaged fence or stolen tools. Deep down, he recognized a standoff was inevitable. Moments later, Rebecca Owens pulled up in her weathered pickup to check his cattle. At 28, the determined veterinarian served Mason County's livestock tirelessly. She barely managed a greeting when a thunderous roar swallowed the calm. 5 gray vultures emerged from a haze of dust on Wade's driveway, forming a tight, menacing wedge. Their emblem, a fierce winged skull, adorned each leather jacket. When they cut their engines, the silence felt strangely heavier than the noise. A hulking man known as Raptor dismounted, a vulture tattoo crawling up his neck. Wade's gaze flickered over the group, picking out firearms concealed under vests, brass knuckles glinting in half-gloved hands. Their stances suggested training and arrogance. Raptor sized Wade up. "You should have listened," he said in a gravelly tone. "These roads can be dangerous if you don't have friends." Wade edged forward, placing himself between the bikers and Rebecca. "Appreciate the concern," he replied, voice calm but firm. "But I'm all set." One rider, Blade by his patch, let out a derisive laugh. "You don't get it. This isn't optional." Raptor stomped on a section of wheat, punctuating the threat. Wade felt a flicker of anger at the deliberate damage. Rebecca looked ready to intervene, but Wade gently motioned her away. "Go inside," he said under his breath. She hesitated, aware of how Raptor's gaze lingered on her, then hurried toward the farmhouse. The remaining bikers watched her go with predatory interest. Wade breathed evenly, every sense sharpened. He recognized discipline in their formation. This was no random gang of thrill-seekers. They were purposeful, possibly ex-military. Unmoved by their intimidation, Wade stared Raptor in the eye. "I hear you," he said, "but I won't be needing your services." The tension in the air crackled like static before a storm. Mason County was about to learn how swiftly violence could knock on its door. Wade had seen men like this before, in other countries, under different flags, and he knew exactly what kind of reckoning awaited them all. The confrontation that morning ended with veiled threats and a cloud of exhaust, but Wade knew it was the start of something more. After the Gray Vultures rode off, he found Rebecca inside the farmhouse, her expression a tangle of worry and indignation. She had dealt with all manner of obstinate clients and rowdy teens, but never a biker gang extorting neighbors. "Is this really happening here?" she asked, staring out the window as the last bike roared away. Wade nodded. "They tested the waters at the market, now they're pushing in." Word spread swiftly, as it does in tight communities. Some farmers paid protection fees, hoping to avoid trouble. Others tried to ignore the gang, though the Gray Vultures only tightened their grip. Rumor said several local shops had already yielded to extortion. Wade continued his farm chores, mind humming with tactical considerations he once used overseas. Could those same skills defend Mason County? Tension soon reached Cora Jennings, the elderly widow next door. She lived on a small ranch her late husband, a war vet and mechanic, had built up with careful labor. Struggling on her own, she often relied on Wade's help. Then Rebecca arrived, breathless, to relay how the gray vultures were tearing through Cora's new winter wheat on their motorcycles. "They're sending a message," she managed, face flushed from speeding over back roads. Wade refused to stand by. He drove across fields toward Cora's property. 5 riders were churning up the tender sprouts, leaving deep gouges. Among them, he recognized Blade from earlier, a sneer etched on his face. Another biker, a burly man called Boone, shifted uneasily, as though recognizing a fellow soldier beneath Wade's calm exterior. "This is private property," Wade called, marching into the field. "Leave." Blade revved his engine, smirking. "We're teaching folks about cooperation." The midday heat bore down as Wade assessed their spacing, glimpsed firearms, and calculated angles. He was outnumbered, but refusing would mean giving these bullies free rein. They exhibited discipline, an edge that suggested training. Still, they hadn't guessed Wade's background. He warned them once more to leave. Blade sneered, flicked a brass-knuckled fist at him. Wade sidestepped, locked the arm, and swept Blade's legs, slamming him to the soil in one fluid motion. Silence clamped down. The other bikers tensed, hands twitching near weapons. Boone's eyes narrowed. He recognized that technique. "Force recon," Boone muttered, stepping back. Suspicion flickered across the others' faces. Wade's heart pounded, but his gaze held firm. In that instant, he'd revealed far more than a simple farmer's grit. The gray vultures realized they faced someone with serious military skill, and the tension in the battered field foretold a pivotal shift for everyone in Mason County. After that tense standoff, the gray vultures rode off, leaving behind scarred wheat fields and a shaken community. Yet the news spread quickly. Wade Reynolds, the soft-spoken farmer on the outskirts of Mason County, was far from helpless. In the days that followed, the bikers took a subtler approach, prowling around at odd hours, loitering near local shops, and intimidating younger farmhands. Wade surveyed his fields with a heightened alertness, remembering his days navigating volatile areas overseas. The echoes of that life, the keen sense of perimeter security and reading threat levels, now guided him once more. Rebecca called him in a panic one late evening. She was still at her veterinary clinic on the edge of town and had noticed unfamiliar motorcycles circling the building. One had even come inside under the pretense of buying pet medication, but asked strange questions about storing supplies off the books. Sensing trouble, she locked the doors and reached out to Wade. Without hesitation, he threw on his jacket, fired up his truck, and headed into the moonlit roads that wound through Mason County's farmland. When he arrived, 3 bikes were idling at the edge of the clinic's parking lot. Their riders watched him approach, hostility evident in their rigid shoulders. Wade parked in full view and stepped out, making no attempt at stealth. It was a deliberate move. He wanted them to see he wasn't afraid. The lead biker, a heavily tattooed man, spat on the ground. "So this is the guy messing with our business?" The man's posture spoke of street confidence, but not the disciplined presence Wade had observed in Boone or Blade. Still, they were armed and reckless, and that made them dangerous. Wade told Rebecca to get in his truck. The biker said nothing as she slipped by, though their eyes narrowed. Once she was safely inside, Wade turned back. "Harassing neighbors isn't the best way to make friends," he said mildly, voice steady. One of them snarled, hand sliding toward a concealed pistol. Wade's stance shifted, ready for the worst, but the lead rider signaled a retreat. They mounted their bikes, growled a parting threat, and disappeared into the night. "You think they'll be back?" Rebecca asked quietly as Wade drove her home. He nodded. Bullies don't quit unless someone forces them to. The next morning brought another blow. Wade discovered his equipment barn had been broken into overnight. Hydraulic lines on his harvester were slashed, irrigation control panels ripped out. It was methodical damage, not random hooliganism. As neighbors gathered to help him assess losses, murmurs of fear spread. The gray vultures were escalating, clearly sending a message to anyone defying them. Yet they'd made one miscalculation. Every act of intimidation rallied more people to Wade's side, reinforcing that Mason County was done bowing to threats. In the wake of the barn vandalism, the community rallied. Cora Jennings arrived with a plate of fresh biscuits, though worry etched lines on her face. Younger farmers showed up with spare parts, while retired mechanic Ray Keller tinkered with Wade's machinery, volunteering expertise gained during his years running a local garage. Rebecca organized neighbors into informal patrols, driving around at odd hours to deter further attacks. Mason County had always been a place where folks shared harvests and lent equipment, but now that spirit crystallized into a firm stand against intimidation. While Wade labored to repair his harvester, he received an unexpected call from Boone, the large gray vulture who had hesitated that day in Cora's field. Boone spoke in hushed tones, explaining he couldn't stay on the phone long. It became clear that not all of the gray vultures were enthusiastic about Raptor's escalating campaign of threats. Many had joined the gang seeking camaraderie, a sense of belonging after returning from military service. Boone himself had served in the Marine Corps and had glimpsed the same specialized training in Wade's swift takedown of Blade. He confessed that Raptor was no real veteran, despite boasting about covert ops. Suspicious details in Raptor's stories led Boone to dig deeper, discovering that their leader's entire persona was manufactured to manipulate real veterans into following him. Wade listened intently, recognizing the conflict Boone faced. Gangs like the Gray Vultures often preyed on the vulnerabilities of those who struggled to reintegrate into civilian life. Promises of brotherhood, structure, and quick money lured in men who'd once worn a uniform. By the time they realized they were caught in a criminal enterprise, it was too late. Loyalty, blackmail, or fear kept them from leaving. Boone revealed that someone else was bankrolling Raptor, a figure named Noah Harlow. Rumors said he was a private military contractor with high-level connections, using the Gray Vultures to create a network of intimidation across multiple rural counties. The mention of Harlow caused a chill. Wade had heard the name whispered in certain circles overseas, an operator who brokered shady deals under the guise of security consulting. If he was indeed orchestrating events in Mason County, it meant the gang's presence was part of a larger, more dangerous puzzle. Boone urged Wade to be cautious. Raptor's top lieutenants, like Blade, were loyal and mean, but Harlow could bring far worse upon the community if he deemed it necessary. After the call ended, Wade wiped sweat from his brow, absorbing the gravity of what he'd learned. This wasn't just a gang problem. It was a potential infiltration by a well-connected mercenary operation. Mason County was merely a testing ground. If they crushed resistance here, they could replicate the scheme elsewhere. Wade felt the old resolve rising in him again. He had walked away from the Marine Corps to find peace, but it seemed his skills were needed once more. The question now was whether the community could stand firm or if Harlow's shadowy reach would prove too long to resist. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rolling Kansas horizon, Wade transformed his modest living room into a makeshift command center. He spread out a county map on the dining table, marking spots where the Gray Vultures had shown up. Local diners, feed stores, tractor supply outlets, and the homes of farmers rumored to have grudgingly paid the gang. Rebecca joined him, bringing her laptop filled with notes from veterinary appointments and sightings of unfamiliar bikes. She had also started documenting patients who had left cryptic comments about being pressured to hide packages or store items for nameless customers. Across the table sat Boone, who had slipped away from the gang under the pretense of running errands. He carried a spiral notebook containing details on the Gray Vulture's activities, times, places, and the personnel assigned to each job. He was still cautious, refusing to speak above a whisper, even as Wade's farmhouse remained well away from prying eyes. Boone explained that Raptor had demanded the group step up enforcement on local businesses that were slow to comply. Meanwhile, references to Harlow cropped up in cryptic directives, always pointing to secure transportation of sensitive material. Wade traced a line on the map with his finger. "Here," he said, indicating an abandoned trucking depot on the outskirts of Mason County. "They've been circling it, right?" Boone nodded. Word from inside the gang was that Harlow intended to use the depot for storing something big, possibly weapons or contraband. Given Harlow's rumored background in private military contracting, Wade suspected something more dangerous, perhaps chemical or biological materials. Rebecca leaned forward. I had a clinic break-in 2 nights ago. They didn't take medication. Instead, they copied records of my veterinary routes, including which farms I visit and when. She tapped a few keys on her laptop and showed them a list of suspicious data queries. It's like they're mapping out transport routes, figuring out how supplies or certain substances can move under the radar. My guess is they want to use ordinary deliveries to mask illegal cargo. Wade's mind churned with strategy. He remembered how supply chains operated in volatile regions overseas. Criminal groups exploited established routes, piggybacking on legitimate commerce. Raptor's strong-arm tactics forced local compliance, while Harlow orchestrated the broader logistics. They're building an infrastructure right under our noses, Wade said grimly. Once it's in place, they can move anything, drugs, weapons, or worse, across the country without raising suspicion. They deliberated long into the night, Boone providing insights on the gang's chain of command, Rebecca detailing the medical and veterinary angles, and Wade recalling procedures from his past missions. Each new piece of information painted a picture of a sophisticated network designed to exploit rural communities. It was a chilling realization. Mason County was just the pilot project. If they succeeded here, Harlow could replicate the model across numerous quiet towns. The farmhouse lights burned late, voices low but resolved, as they planned ways to expose the conspiracy that threatened them all. 3 days later, the gray vultures escalated again. Wade was in the middle of repairing a fence post when his phone buzzed. Rebecca's voice crackled through. Wade, they're at the feed store, Albert Preston's place. They've got him cornered. Albert was a Vietnam veteran who ran one of the county's oldest feed depots. He had grandchildren living with him, and rumors said the bikers threatened them to force Albert's compliance. Wade dropped his tools and made for the truck, heart pounding. He arrived to find half a dozen gray vultures parked in a semicircle near the store's entrance. Albert stood by his loading dock, shoulders slumped. One of the riders had brandished a photo of Albert's grandson at school, an unmistakable threat. Wade climbed out of his truck, scanning the scene. Despite the tension, he forced himself to walk calmly forward. Something wrong, gentlemen? He asked. The lead rider, a man with chain tattoos winding down his arms, sneered. Mind your business, farmer. Old man here isn't making deliveries on time. Albert, trembling, lifted his gaze. They want to use my storage for shipments, he whispered to Wade. I told them no. The chain-tattooed biker turned on Wade. Beat it, or you'll regret it. But the threat rang hollow after what happened at Cora's Field. Wade stared him down. If you want a conversation about schedules, maybe we do it without threatening a grandfather. One of the vultures looked uneasy, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone. Boone had told Wade that not all gang members relished terrorizing senior citizens. Some had begun questioning Raptor's leadership. The chain-tattooed thug, however, was clearly not among them. He reached inside his vest, his face twisted in rage. Wade braced, every muscle tensed. Just then, another motorcycle rumbled up. Boone. He cut his engine and walked toward the group, speaking in a low voice. Stand down. The chain-tattooed man glared. You siding with him now? Boone glanced at Wade, then back at his fellow vulture. Raptor's orders were to keep cooperation friendly if possible. Harassing a war vet's grandkids crosses a line. A moment hung heavy as the two men locked eyes. Then Chain Tattoo relented, muttering curses, and signaled the others to back off. Albert exhaled in relief. Wade moved to Albert's side, offering a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Go check on your grandson, he said softly. The old man nodded, eyes brimming with gratitude. Meanwhile, Boone met Wade's gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Boone was risking his standing in the gang, and maybe his life, to prevent more brutality. In that tense standoff, lines within the gray vultures began to blur. Some saw the cost of Raptor's tyranny and grew uneasy. Others dug in, loyal to intimidation and easy money. After the bikes roared away, leaving only tire tracks and dust, Wade and Albert surveyed the cracked asphalt. The feed store manager shook his head in disbelief, muttering about how his quiet life had turned into a battlefield. Wade looked at the departing silhouettes, thinking of Harlow's bigger plan. This was more than a small-town feud. It was a spark that could ignite something larger. "We'll fight this," Wade assured Albert. "All of it." The sense of looming confrontation grew daily. Boone fed Wade bits of intelligence and whispered phone calls. Harlow was planning a significant move soon, and Raptor had instructions to secure Mason County at all costs. Federal authorities were reportedly compromised in neighboring counties, with local law enforcement on the gang's payroll. If the same corruption reached Mason County, any formal complaint or call for help could backfire. Faced with this reality, Wade decided to reach out to an old military contact he trusted, Avery Nichols, a retired Marine Corps major now working with a federal investigative agency. They had served together in classified operations, forging a bond of mutual respect. Over a secure line, Avery listened intently to the details. Harlow's name, the Gray Vulture's intimidation racket, and the suspicion they were building a network for smuggling high-risk materials. "Sounds bigger than a local gang problem," Avery remarked. "We've had intel linking Harlow to arms trafficking and hush-hush biological research. Send me everything you have." At Wade's farmhouse, a flurry of covert planning began. Rebecca collected data from her clinic about any stranger requesting odd supplies or trying to access veterinary records. Albert documented each approach the gang made to his feed store, noting license plates if possible. Boone risked more in-person meetings, bringing rosters of who was guarding certain routes. Together, they formed a plan to gather indisputable evidence of Harlow's operation, enough to attract federal attention that wasn't tainted by corruption. Wade's living room table was covered in maps, photos, and notebooks. He highlighted possible trafficking routes, back roads with minimal police presence, abandoned barns, the old trucking depot. Some patterns emerged. Raptor's men would converge on certain nights, especially when the moon was low. Rebecca speculated they used the darkness to hide movements of large vehicles possibly carrying illegal cargo. Meanwhile, Cora Jennings and other neighbors patrolled in pairs, watching for suspicious trucks entering or leaving the county. Every day brought new challenges. Raptor unleashed more intimidation, vandalizing equipment, scattering nails on rural driveways, even setting small fires near hay barns. But Wade noticed a growing rift within the Gray Vultures. Boone hinted that half the riders were ex-military men who'd been drawn in by false promises of camaraderie. They wanted a sense of purpose again, not to terrorize farmers. Raptor's deceit about his own service record had begun sowing doubts. As tension peaked, news came that Harlow himself might be arriving to oversee the final phase of the operation. That revelation heightened everyone's sense of urgency. If they allowed Harlow to establish a foothold, Mason County wouldn't just face a spike in criminal activity, it would become a key node in a national pipeline of illicit goods. Late into the night, Wade, Rebecca, Boone, and an ever-growing circle of concerned citizens worked to coordinate a strategy. They had to move before Harlow locked everything down, or the chance to save their county might vanish in a hail of intimidation and bribes. Dawn broke on a day that felt electric with possibility. Boone had learned that Harlow was en route, traveling under the guise of a corporate security consultant. Raptor was assembling the Gray Vultures in full force at the old trucking depot on the far side of Mason County. Their goal, receive a high-value shipment that Harlow planned to route through farmland hidden in plain sight. Boone suspected the cargo was more than mere guns. It could be hazardous materials, maybe biological agents. This was no amateur operation. Wade donned rugged clothes reminiscent of his service days, tough boots, cargo pants, and a canvas jacket. While others in the county rose for a routine day, he steeled himself for what might be the most dangerous confrontation of his civilian life. Rebecca likewise braced for action, ensuring her clinic staff were safe and double-checking the emergency medical kits in her truck. Cora Jennings took charge of alerting neighbors, instructing them to stay vigilant and keep children indoors. Albert readied his feed store in case anyone needed shelter. They'd set up watchers at strategic points around the depot, a young farmer with binoculars on a nearby ridge, a retired postal worker who knew the back roads better than anyone, and a couple of ranchers perched in trucks behind hay bales. Throughout the morning, they monitored arrivals. Gray Vultures rumbled in, one group after another, forming a perimeter around the dilapidated buildings. Occasionally, a black SUV or an unmarked van pulled up, men in suits stepping out to confer with Raptor's lieutenants. Through texts and discreet radio chatter, the watchers relayed everything to Wade. Midday arrived, hot and still. Wade decided it was time to coordinate with Avery Nichols, the retired major who had promised federal backup if they found solid evidence. Using a secure phone line, Wade described the scene. "We have around 20 bikers, plus what look like private contractors, possibly ex-military by their stance, armed. We suspect a convoy might arrive soon." Avery's voice crackled. "We're scrambling a specialized team, but you need to confirm the cargo. We can't move in on guesswork." Tension mounted. Rebecca, from her vantage point at the clinic's rear parking lot, saw an unmarked 18-wheeler roll through the county line. Its route matched roads Raptor's men favored. She radioed Wade, "This might be it." With that alert, watchers reported the gray vultures forming a cordon outside the depot. Boone, still feigning loyalty to Raptor, texted Wade that Harlow had arrived, stepping out of a polished SUV, wearing business attire that contrasted sharply with the biker's leather. Now or never, Wade thought. They needed indisputable proof. Boone had agreed to slip in to the depot, capturing photos on a hidden phone. The rest of the watchers stayed ready to document the moment the cargo was transferred. Rebecca stood by with her medical bag. If a firefight broke out, injuries would be inevitable. The entire county seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the clash between an organized criminal network and a band of determined citizens, guided by a quiet farmer who once served in force recon. Inside the depot, high windows let in shards of sunlight that fell on cracked concrete floors. Dust motes swirled in stale air. Boone's heart hammered as he stepped inside, phone hidden against his thigh, camera rolling through a small opening in his jacket. Harlow was already there, tall, fit, with a crisp suit that spoke of corporate boardrooms rather than back-alley deals. Yet his eyes betrayed a calculating sharpness, like a predator sizing up territory. Raptor hovered close, head cocked in deference, revealing who really held power. A semicircle of armed men stood around a large shipping container. Boone inched eye closer, pretending to check a side entrance. He caught snippets of conversation. Hush money, routes through farmland, overseas buyers. Harlow spoke with the polished tone of a businessman finalizing a contract. "Rural communities are perfect for this," he said, his voice echoing. "Low profile, plenty of ex-military in need of direction. We replicate this model across the Midwest and beyond, with your gray vultures as the front line." Raptor nodded, pride gleaming in his eyes. Boone managed to angle his phone, capturing Harlow's face, the container's markings, and armed guards. Then he stepped away, texting Wade a single word: "Confirmed." Outside, Wade felt his phone buzz. This was what Avery Nichols needed. He relayed the news to their watchers, instructing them to document the incoming truck. Moments later, a battered semi rumbled onto the lot, escorted by 2 SUVs. Its trailer doors open, revealing crates strapped to metal pallets. Through binoculars, the watchers glimpsed hazard symbols stamped on the sides, an ominous sign pointing to dangerous materials. Despite the midday heat, a chill settled over those observing. The gray vultures quickly moved into formation to unload the cargo, verifying each crate. Raptor supervised, barking orders. Harlow stayed behind, speaking into a satellite phone. "Yes, we're proceeding. No complications so far." Unaware of Boone's covert filming, he walked along the perimeter, scanning the horizon. But the watchers were well concealed, hidden behind ridges, barns, and even thick clusters of cattails near a dried creek bed. When the unloading began, Wade signaled the final step, contacting Avery for an immediate response. If the federal team arrived too late, the cargo might vanish into hidden compartments or slip away on back roads. But Avery assured him a specialized unit was inbound, including hazmat-trained agents. They only needed a precise moment to coordinate the raid. Any misstep could lead to a bloody confrontation that might spill into the unsuspecting county. At that critical juncture, Rebecca saw a smaller group of gray vultures peel off to patrol the surrounding roads. They carried radios and sidearms, ready to intercept intruders. She radioed Wade, urging caution. Meanwhile, Boone edged toward an exit, searching for a vantage point to see how Raptor and Harlow would finalize the deal. Every second dripped with tension. One slip-up and the entire sting operation might collapse, leaving Mason County at the mercy of criminals with a pipeline for lethal cargo. Suddenly, the roar of rotor blades rippled across the dusty lot. Two helicopters appeared on the horizon, cresting the ridgeline with military precision. Harlow's head snapped up, and Raptor's eyes went wide. They shouted frantically, ordering the gray vultures to secure the perimeter. Boone, concealed behind stacked crates, sent a hurried text. "They're on to us. Raid is starting." In seconds, everything erupted. Federal vehicles sped onto the depot grounds, lights flashing. Agents in tactical gear disembarked, firearms raised, commanding everyone to stand down. A hazmat truck followed, prepared to handle dangerous materials. Overhead, the choppers circled like watchful hawks. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. Harlow spun, fury contorting his features. "What the?" he snarled, realizing his carefully constructed operation had been compromised. Raptor rallied his biker crew, and a staccato of gunfire cracked the tense air. Bullets pinged off metal structures and shattered depot windows. Wade, crouched behind a rusted tractor near the entrance, felt adrenaline flood his veins. He signaled to watchers to hold back. Most were unarmed locals who had no business in a firefight. Agents advanced in tight formation, returning measured fire, focusing on containing the threat rather than a shootout. One gray vulture tried to hop on his bike to flee, but was tackled by an agent in full tactical gear. Rebecca, positioned in her truck behind a row of hay bales, heard the chatter over their makeshift radio network. She readied medical supplies, anticipating casualties. Another burst of shots rang out, and a bullet ricocheted off the semi-trailer. Inside, Boone saw Harlow snatch a pistol from one of his hired guns and start barking orders. "Protect the container. We can't let them confiscate it." The mercenaries closed ranks, trying to shift the crates into waiting vans. Wade's heart thumped as he made a calculated move, sprinting low across open ground. He spotted Boone darting out from behind the crates, phone still in hand. Boone waved him over, shouting above the din, "They're trying to hide key evidence." Wade nodded. They had to preserve the cargo as proof. Ducking behind a low wall, they devised a split-second plan. Boone would distract Raptor's enforcers, while Wade, leveraging old infiltration skills, would lock down the truck's doors. Crouching behind scattered debris, Wade made his approach. Above, the helicopter's blades thundered, prop wash scattering dust clouds. Raptor fired wildly at the incoming agents, face twisted with desperation. Meanwhile, Harlow barked into a satellite phone, demanding backup. The entire scene was chaos. Bikers scrambling, suits yelling, federal teams converging. If not for Wade's training and the Watchers' vantage points, it would have dissolved into an all-out war. Instead, as Wade snapped the trailer's locks in place, he saw agents close in on Harlow, pinning him to the concrete. A swirl of gun smoke and adrenaline later, the yard fell eerily still, broken only by shouts of "Clear!" and the thrum of the helicopter overhead. When the gunfire ceased, the federal team swiftly took control. Agents in hazmat suits hustled to the shipping container, confirming the presence of dangerous materials. Chemical agents, if the labeling was accurate. Harlow, still writhing under an agent's knee, cursed in disbelief. Raptor lay nearby, hands cuffed behind his back, glaring daggers at Boone, who stood to one side, phone trembling in his grip. It was over, at least for now. Wade emerged from behind the trailer, chest heaving, scanning for casualties. Several bikers nursed minor injuries, and 2 federal agents had suffered superficial wounds. Luckily, Rebecca was there to provide immediate first aid, assisted by an EMT who arrived with the hazmat truck. "We've got you," she murmured, pressing gauze on a biker's bleeding arm. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, a local vet tending injuries caused by the man's own gang's violence. Avery Nichols appeared on scene, stepping out of a dark SUV. The major-turned-investigator wore a bulletproof vest and a grim expression. He gave Wade a curt nod and surveyed the chaos. "Good work," he said. "We've been after Harlow for a long time. Didn't think we'd catch him here, in the middle of farmland." Wade exhaled, a tension lifting from his shoulders. He offered Avery a quick rundown, praising Boone's courage and the community's collective effort. Agents began cataloging the crates inside the trailer, photographing each step of the evidence chain. By the time the swirling dust settled, it became clear that the gray vultures had been pawns in a far larger operation. Harlow used them as muscle to secure a pipeline for distributing lethal contraband under the radar. In rural areas where law enforcement was sparse, the plan might have succeeded if not for one quiet farmer with a military past and a handful of neighbors refusing to bow. Boone approached Wade, exhaustion etched on his face. "I'm done with that life," he said. "Raptor lied about everything, his service, our cause. I just wanted a place to belong after I left the Corps." Wade placed a hand on Boone's shoulder. "You can still serve in a way that helps people," he replied. "Most of us come home looking for a mission. Let's make it the right one." Boone nodded, tears threatening to spill. Around them, subdued bikers were led away in cuffs, some wearing expressions of relief rather than anger. Rebecca helped treat an agent with a shoulder graze and then walked over, her face a mix of fatigue and relief. "We did it," she whispered to Wade, eyes shining. He smiled, though the weight of the day pressed on him. As uniformed personnel secured the depot and the caged chemicals, Mason County took its first real breath of freedom since the gray vultures arrived. Clouds gathered in the late afternoon sky, hinting at rain, a welcome sign of renewal for the battered fields outside. The days following the raid brought a flurry of activity in Mason County. News vans appeared on dusty roads, eager to cover the story of a hidden criminal network smashed by federal agents and determined locals. Reporters interviewed Wade, Rebecca, and even Cora Jennings, who delighted in telling them how simple country folks had stood up to organized crime. The old trucking depot remained cordoned off, guarded by federal personnel cataloging evidence that tied Harlow to international smuggling. Meanwhile, investigators probed local officials to see how deep Harlow's corruption ran. Avery Nichols quietly warned Wade that bigger fish might still lurk in the shadows. But for the moment, Mason County was safe. Many of the gray vultures were shipped off to federal lockups, though a handful like Boone chose to cooperate. Their testimony painted a grim picture of how a cunning manipulator had exploited veterans' loyalties, offering them a brotherhood that turned out to be a sham. Boone and some other repentant bikers began helping rebuild damaged properties, including Cora's Fields and Albert's feed store. They worked day and night under the watchful eye of neighbors who, though wary, appreciated the effort. "We can't erase what we did," Boone admitted, "but maybe we can fix a part of it." That humility struck a chord in the community. Over shared meals, old resentments began to thaw. Mason County's hallmark generosity extended even to those who once tried to harm it, on the condition they genuinely sought to make amends. Rebecca found herself busier than ever. She tended not just to animals, but also to the physical and mental well-being of residents shaken by the conflict. Some farmers admitted they had had nightmares about masked men showing up in the night. A few veterans in the county opened up about their own struggles transitioning to civilian life. Her clinic became a hub of sorts, where folks came to talk as much as to get medical supplies for their livestock. Wade, for his part, returned to his fields with a mixture of relief and lingering vigilance. He spent long hours walking the rows of wheat, ensuring no sabotage remained. The stress of the ordeal lingered in the tightness of his back and the swirl of memories that tugged at his mind late at night. But every morning he rose, grateful to see the sun ripple across the unbroken expanse of farmland. The quiet he'd sought in moving to Mason County felt real again. In a modest ceremony at the county courthouse, representatives from the federal task force praised the community's courage. They thanked Wade by name for his crucial role in exposing Harlow's operation. While Wade accepted the commendation with humility, he knew the victory belonged to everyone. Rebecca, Cora, Albert, Boone, and the watchful eyes of neighbors who refused to turn a blind eye. The farmland that once seemed like a vulnerable frontier had proven to be a place of fierce solidarity and hope. A full year after the gray vulture's downfall, life in Mason County had not only returned to normal, it had blossomed in new ways. Fields ravaged by motorcycle treads were replanted, yielding a surprisingly strong harvest. Cora Jennings joked that her wheat grew better after a little turmoil, attributing it to the extra care neighbors poured in. Albert Preston's feed store prospered with fresh contracts, no longer shadowed by threats. He hired local veterans, giving them honest work and a renewed sense of purpose. Rebecca's clinic evolved into a broader community resource, where folks brought not just sick livestock, but also personal troubles. She helped organize support groups for returning service members, ensuring they found real camaraderie instead of the false promises a gang might offer. Boone and a few former Gray Vultures played a pivotal role, sharing their cautionary tale. They spoke at town gatherings, urging younger vets to channel their military skills into protecting their neighbors rather than preying on them. Wade became an informal mentor for several veterans, guiding them through the complexities of civilian life. He showed them that discipline, loyalty, and resolve could be tremendous assets for community building. His quiet leadership resonated in the hearts of those who had once lost their way. Each morning he still walked his fields, a routine that kept him grounded. Watching the sun rise over swaying wheat, he reflected on how conflict had nearly consumed the county he'd grown to love, and how unity had saved it. The trucking depot, once a hub for illicit goods, now housed a new agricultural cooperative. Federal grants and community donations converted it into a facility where farmers stored and processed produce. Children came on field trips to learn about farm-to-table systems, and local businesses thrived with a newly invigorated sense of pride. The specter of Harlow's scheme served as a stark reminder of how close evil can lurk, but also of how a resolute, united community can overcome. Though the memory of gunfire and fear lingered in recollections, Mason County refused to let that darkness define it. Instead, the town embraced the lessons learned. They implemented neighborhood watch programs, set up emergency communication lines, and built stronger ties to legitimate veteran organizations. All these efforts cultivated a security that sprang from compassion and cooperation, rather than from intimidation or violence. Standing on his porch one late afternoon, Wade watched cars roll down the county road, passing fields that now gleamed golden under the waning sun. He heard distant laughter, perhaps neighbors enjoying a small fair, or children running through yard sprinklers. The distant hum of farm equipment floated in the breeze, and though he felt the faint, ever-present echo of battles fought both abroad and at home, he also felt peace. In Mason County, the quiet man tending his crops had faced down a threat far larger than any single person. Together, they'd all proven that sometimes the fiercest force lies not in roaring engines or menacing threats, but in the steadfast unity of people determined to protect the place they call home. Looking back on this story, I feel uplifted by the sheer resilience that emerged in a small, unsuspecting community. Through moments of raw fear and intense confrontation, bonds of trust formed among people who realized they shared more than just a patch of land. They shared a common resolve to protect what they loved. From my perspective, it's a testament to how ordinary folks can stand tall against extraordinary threats, uniting under values like loyalty, empathy, and respect. In the end, these quiet heroes rediscovered their sense of purpose and turned adversity into an opportunity for lasting growth. But this is merely my take. What do you think? I'd love to hear your reflections and theories about the characters' journeys, the decisions they made, and how you would have responded in their shoes. Drop your comments and let's keep the conversation going.